Hey, Michael, how are you?
Good. I don't see you though, Michelle.
I'm sorry, I gotta turn my camera on. I'm super camera shy. There,
Uh, so, do you hold a seat on the planning board?
I am an alternate member,
Ah,
but I would say I'm an active alternate member because I've helped out, either like, doing research or answering questions, come back to the board with something, that kind of stuff. I know I helped Rob with a few things and
right.
I mean, really, the only role I can serve in a voting capacity if there was a subdivision
Yep.
before the board. But other than that, but I think Rob looks at alternate members as a value add because they can help with certain things, if the board members are being assigned certain activities and they need extra arms and legs, is an opportunity there, right?
Sure. So how many, if you will, full-on members are there and how many alternates?
2 alternates, and I think it's 7 members. Let me just check the website.
2 and 7? Huh.
Yeah, there were no elections this year for the board. I think the elections come up next year. I don't know why it's allowing me.
It's interesting with a board of that size, I would think it would be typical or suitable to have some of them up for election each year.
Yeah, I think something got messed up where,
Somebody dropped out and
yeah, I think it started when Richard Snyder, I don't know if he just did not run or he resigned after he sold his house. I don't know if you remember that. It was a few years ago.
Yep.
And then 2 people ran to, I think, one to fill his role, and yeah, it was kind of weird. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, 7 members and 2 alternates.
So has there been any movement toward a, if you will, a compromise between the 2 versions of the short-term
No,
article?
no, the planning board supports the short-term rental committee's proposal. I authored a comparison document that just showed kind of the differences between the 2 warrant articles. We use that with FinCom, planning, and for Tony as he was looking to, provide some additional.
So that would be useful to have available at town meeting for the members.
Yeah, so
on the floor.
there was a discussion to include it as an appendix in the warrant articles in the warrant, and it wasn't, so I don't know what happened to that. I don't know if Mark knows, since he's on, can ask him before we get started. Mark, if you want to unmute, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mark, about a month ago, in my role as an alternate member on the planning board, I wrote a comparison document for the short-term rental. It took the short-term rental committee's bylaws, both general and zoning, and compared it to the citizens petition. It was I don't know if you saw that document or not.
I did.
Okay. Tony had mentioned it was going to go as an appendix in the warrant, but I don't see it. So I don't know if there was a change to that, and if there was, why, because Michael is looking for something similar. Mike, and I'll send you the document. He believes, I think others will, that it should be something for citizens to look at town meeting.
Yeah, I don't know why it was left out. I'll check with Tony in the morning, but you could. Yeah, I have no idea. And if it was left out, we can always make copies and put them on the seats at town hall for.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. I know Rob Thibault provided his feedback and he was very supportive of it, as well as Rob Steinberg, and Rob Steinberg looked at it as a work product of the planning board. So he was concerned that it should have been included as part of the planning board's response. So he was gonna follow up with Tony. I don't know what the outcome was, but I haven't seen a note on it. He may not have included me, and I've been busy this week. So Friday's kind of my catch-up day on all things town stuff. So I was gonna do it then.
Okay, we'll check tomorrow.
Okay.
Might also be helpful to put a link to it on the website, because this, with 2 competing proposals, this is going to generate a hell of a lot of mental confusion to people who first begin to pay attention to it the morning of town meeting or at the floor, you know. And
Yeah.
confusion does not help the good guys.
Well, and especially when I know in Tony's remarks last night, he's going to be setting up some, open houses or sessions for the community to go through the warrant article, allow people to ask questions and stuff. And it may be good document to have handy for folks so they can look at it and ask their questions. But honestly, the two biggest things that are different is the short-term rental committee is requesting the zoning board's appeals to support a permit process for non-owner occupied properties. And the short-term rental committee requesting a 5% cap. We requested a 4% cap, and short-term rental supported the 4% cap, as did the planning board and FinCom.
Mhm.
So those are the two biggest differences. Everything else are just, there's definitely some nuances, and I tried to detail them out as best I could. And like I said, I got Rob Thibault to look at it, and he was generally pleased with the outcome of it. So
I haven't seen the the booklet yet, but it's the short-term rental article is first, right?
no, it's like Article 24 or
No,
25.
but it's before the citizen petition one.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I guess the only other outstanding question on those voting is, since we haven't heard about a friendly amendment yet, right? And whether there can come to an agreement. We need 2/3 vote for one of them. What happens if we get 2/3 vote on both, or what happens if both fail? Those are the other.
Both fail. The current situation persists
Yes,
at
we
least
go
for a year. Right?
unregulated, which is a problem. But if both pass, then we have a equally problem that constitutes either keeps the short-term rental committee to work on this and develop regulations, or we create a new committee, maybe expand the membership a little bit to help, generate those new regulations. I look at wetlands bylaw as kind of maybe a baseline. We passed a bylaw, we constituted a committee that worked on the regulations. Comcom was the leader behind that. So I don't know where it will go. All right, so we've
Well,
got,
I think it's unlikely that both will pass.
yeah,
Well, it might make sense for a few people to have some amendments ready for when the second one comes up, amendments that could essentially take the wind out of the sails of,
I don't know if you're following the Marblehead Town meeting. They went 3 days on over 50 articles, and it was quite interesting. And someone tried to do a friendly amendment on an article the other night, and people were not happy with it. It failed.
We can beat
So-
3 days. We can get those guys.
Yes. Oh, and by the way, Mark, you'll appreciate that. Their quorum is 300.
Mhm.
We're 75.
Yeah, it's a percentage of the
Population.
no, the registered voters, I believe.
Yeah, I was very surprised by that. Okay, I have 6:36. The chair calls the meeting to order for the Housing Protection Plan Subcommittee. Thanks, everybody, for attending. I see Michael Wrongworth, Chair Michelle Capano, Jim Walsh, Mark Cullinan, Lynn Spencer, Patty Karras, and Patrick O'Reilly. So thanks, everybody, for joining. I sent out a couple of emails, so I apologize, trying to get organized and catched up. We haven't met in a few weeks, so it's good to see you all. Wanted to just kind of go through what I think tonight's meeting will generate, and really would appreciate people's input and definitely active discussion, because we've got a lot to cover. So we'll approve the meeting minutes. We'll do a recap from the April 13th meeting. The video was recently posted on YouTube, so if you'd like to go watch it, you can. It's available, so you can catch up on that. But I do want to talk about what we discussed, and then take a look at the revised schedule from MAPC, as well as the review of the goals. So as we talked about those at the meeting, and then I want to go right into discussion on affordable housing options. MAPC has done a draft analysis. I'd like to talk about that, and thank you, Patrick. I know you started looking at that and sending some feedback, so that's great. And then I have some specific questions that they've asked that, we try to get some data on. And so I sent some emails out last night to CPC, Nahant Housing, and Council on the Aging. Lynn, thank you for responding. It's very appreciated. I'm going to be following up with Nahant Housing and Council on the Aging, very similar, trying to gather some information on what they've done to help residents with affordable housing needs. And then I wanted to also talk about town meeting, proposing doing an informational table with some things to promote, both proposed a virtual open house and the next community engagement, as well as materials on just the committee as well, to help people understand what we're doing, where we are.
The video
And
you
then-
referred to a few minutes ago is the video of the forum, the citizens forum. Is that right?
No, the video that I just mentioned was the last meeting on April 13th.
Oh, all right.
And then if there's any new business from any of the committee members, we'll take that. And then we're going to meet next week with MAPC and do a final review of the analysis that they completed. Any questions? I just wanted to do that overview of the agenda first. Okay, not hearing any. Okay, so the chair is asking for an approval of the meeting minutes for March 2nd, 2023 and March 9th, 2023. We did not review these at the last meeting because we didn't have a proper quorum and some members needed to approve them that weren't there. So I think we have everybody. So chair's looking for a motion on that.
So moved.
Mark?
I think I noted what appears to be a typo. There's a
Okay,
use of the word alter on one of these, which I think is meant to be alert.
oh, alert. Okay. Do you remember which document it was?
I don't know. I think you could search it.
Okay,
I'm not able to bring it up without on my screen without blocking
Okay.
you.
or update. Okay, hold on one second. Let's see if I can find it.
Michelle, perhaps we can get a second on my motion and then we can discuss this.
Yeah, so we have a second, Jim seconds. So let me just take a note. Okay, so let's just, before we vote, let's just make sure we're. It's not that copy.
Alter is the word that I
Alter.
saw, and I think it's meant to be alert.
Okay, alter. Alter.
We still have to. hand
Yes, I see it.
I forget to the.
Did you find it,
Yeah,
Michelle?
I found it.
Am
So,
I correct? It's meant to be alert?
yeah, so let me review it with everybody. And let me share my screen so folks can see it. I haven't used Zoom too much, so where's my screen so I can share? Screen. Okay, hopefully folks can see my screen.
No.
Nope. Not yet.
We trust you got it. Oh, there it goes.
No, I want to make sure we're transparent. Okay, so it's right here. This is the meeting minutes for March 2nd, 2023. In the section under calling the meeting to order, the meeting update, schedule meeting started late due to technical issues with the Zoom meeting link. Upon identification of this issue, a new meeting link was created and the meeting notice on Nahant.org was updated. Further, the chair updated 2 Nahant community Facebook pages to alert.
Oh, you did it again.
Alert, there we go, residents who attended who had attended on joining the new Zoom meeting. So that's the correction we'll make to that one. Okay. So we'll do a roll call vote. As long as everyone's in agreement. I'm just trying to make sure I can see everybody. All right, Mike,
Aye.
Jim,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Lynn,
Yes,
Patrick,
Yes.
and the chair is aye. Did I miss anybody? Nope. Okay, great. Thank you. So save that. All right. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the recap of the April 13th meeting. So I sent some materials out for everyone to review or re-review, if you hadn't seen them. We went through, just pull up agenda. Okay, I'm gonna go through this very quickly. Okay. So at the meeting on the 13th, MAPC was provided us this document to go through. We did a very quick review of the forum, the takeaways. They had very good feedback for us in terms of the community input and what people were saying. So I think that's self-explanatory. You could read that. The next section I wanted to discuss and to spend a little bit more time for people that weren't in attendance in the meeting was on the goals. So there were four goals that we discussed: addressing the aging population, creating a housing choice, lowering housing costs, and advancing equity. We spent some time talking through each of these goals as part of the assessment, trying to really focus on making sure when we develop our plan, we're honing in on, all of the imperatives around Nahant. One of the ones that they've proposed and that will come up as a change is, as we look at these goals for consideration, are supporting first-time home ownership. So I think, and I had a chat with Alex this week. Right now in the materials around this was really about programming for first-time home ownership, and I don't think that's necessarily something that Nahant can do. But what we can do is help identify where first-time home buyers can get support, either whether it are programs at the state level or the federal level. We could not create our own program for first-time home buyers, but what we can do is identify all of those resources that a first-time home buyer could review and see what applies to their situation. So there's, things like, supplemental funding for a down payment, or helping paying some of the closing costs, or some type of home modification that needs to be done before they can close, because it could be something like, maybe the front stairs need to be repaired, and they need $1,000 to fix the stairs. There's different situations that can come up. So next week, when we meet with them, there will be discussion on just modifying that goal. But that's one of the things I wanted to highlight and make sure folks were aware of. And then we went through the timeline. So this is the updated timeline. There's been some discussion and some work with Tony in terms of making sure we can still stay on schedule, still stay on budget, address some of the things and concerns that we've talked about regarding the timeline, and then how this will end, and then we move into 3A. So right now, we're around the May 23rd time period. We're planning for the second forum. And the other thing is, certainly by the end of summer or midsummer, August, we'll have a draft of the housing production plan. So coming on a second forum, taking that feedback, probably doing another dial back on, what we heard from the residents, and then getting us ready for a draft based on all of the inputs, the real estate, kind of location analysis, and everything that we've been talking about to date. Then we'll move right into 3A as we start getting ready for that, identifying, when a public forum we should have, if it's during the summer, or early fall, and then discussing those types of visioning sessions. Again, so very similar to what we did with the housing production plan. With 3A though, it will be important that we make sure we have an opportunity to work with the planning board. So in getting that report or whatever that is going to look like, the deliverable, in front of them so they can spend some time to review it and hold public hearings on it, because it will eventually pivot to a warrant article next year. And so hoping by the end of 2023, going into January 2024, that those drafts are ready so we can put them in front of other groups that would need to review them as well, like FinCom, and then, into the warrant for next year. And MAPC will help us frame, what those articles may look like. But it also, and I know I'm putting the cart before the horse a little bit, that's assuming we want to make some type of bylaw changes or zoning bylaw changes. Not sure yet. We still have some more work ahead to discuss around 3A. There's a lot of different discussions going on, whether we shouldn't, applies, doesn't apply. Also, if you have read, some communities are moving forward with it, others are opting out of it and are going to,
Suffer the
take on the risk.
consequences.
Yeah, the consequences may happen. The AG has spoken about this, so we're going to have to look at all of that as well and see how it applies to Nahant. I think the biggest thing in my mind is, in terms of our community, is, sorry, I have the sirens going down the street.
Oh, now I hear them.
Yeah. I don't know where they're heading yet. We're 1 square mile. We're pretty congested. I know there's some potential for opportunity for expansion and growth, but do we want to append the bylaws in a way to allow for more growth, or leave things as it is? Because certain locations, obviously, would be prohibited. We would probably have to be prohibited. I think at Bass Point, there's just, too much there, right? So we wouldn't want to see a multifamily, I don't think.
Can I just interject? Because I think at minimum, we could certainly, I think we could meet our 3A requirements simply by conforming our zoning bylaws to recognize some of our existing multifamily areas. And I think that would be the minimalist approach to say, look, Bass Point has 120 units. They almost certainly meet the 15 units per, acre requirement. Just overlay that and we're done. And I think that would be the minimalist approach to the 3A requirements. I think if there's other opportunities to make it easier for people to redevelop the existing multifamilies into conforming multifamilies. So I think that's certainly worthwhile, but I don't think there's the necessity to for at least for 3A purposes, to drastically increase any density. We could just really recognize existing density in a formalized way.
Patrick, that's interesting. Could you educate me a little bit more on that? It's the first I heard of it.
Well, under 3A, you're talking about zoning. You're not talking about necessarily creating anything. It's unlike the 40B requirements, we actually have to have built units. 3A just requires zoning. So having zoning that meets those minimum thresholds, what are we at? What is it, 85 units or something like that? We just have to have an area that would allow for, if the land was, virgin land, that by right people would be able to build up to that number of units per, that density. And so we have to have that accounted for in some zoned area of town.
There's nothing about 3A that says that one has to basically start from virgin land to.
No.
Right.
Yeah, it basically assumes that so the owner has demolished all their existing properties, and what do they by right have a right to rebuild? So I think there's just some inherent benefits to that promotes multifamily units inherently, because otherwise, if they burn down, you'd have a couple of years to rebuild. Otherwise, you'd have to revert to the single family zone. So there are benefits to that zoning. I think the state did intend by that law to promote increased density, But, you know, if you already have the density and your bylaws just don't reflect that, that's I think where the opportunity lies, the easy opportunity. That's the low hanging fruit Nahant has to just, you know, not to comply with 3A and not really change the nature of the town.
So then what happens in the situation, and I think this is where we have to just discuss scenarios. So if I have a single family home, say I have a 1,500 square foot single family home on a 4,000 square foot lot, and I want to convert it to a 2-family. I would not be able to, because the zoning bylaws would not allow me to, because I could not, can only go so far around the square area footage of the property, correct?
Yeah, anywhere in Nahant, you're not able to construct a new multifamily house without a special permit or variance or whatever, or just doing it illegally.
So,
You can't make it more non-conforming than it already is.
right,
So if you have a 4,000 square foot lot, then you're non-conforming, but you grandfathered in, but if you try to rebuild on it, you can't make it more non-conforming.
right. But if I had a conforming lot, so if I had a 10,000 square foot lot and my house was 2,000 square feet, and now I want to convert it to a 2-family, I would be able to some measure, either through height and through floor area ratio.
Talking about under future bylaws or the
Yes, no, on the future bylaws.
future bylaws? I mean, that's speculation because we haven't really talked about any wording of bylaws, but yeah, I think that's the intent of the potential to do a 3A zone, but
Okay,
you know, I think that said, you know, say if we just rezoned or overlaid past point, then presumably that bylaw would just recognize the right of Bass Point apartment, you know, where that area to have apartment buildings.
yeah,
Up to the currently, and likewise, if we recognized in the business district, you know, the right of people to build commercial and residential above, that would largely conform to the existing use, but you know, right now that's not allowed by right.
okay. All right, so I think this is helpful. So we'll, you know, certainly in the coming weeks, gonna get more into that. Discuss next steps, and that's where we'll end. Okay. Just want to pull up the agenda so I have it in front of me. Any questions from the April 13th meeting? And like I said, the video is available, so you can definitely go and rewatch it if you were unable to attend. Okay. All right, so the next thing is we're going to move into discussing the affordable housing options, and just this is more of continuation from last the meeting on the April 13th and the materials that MAPC put together. Let me just grab that.
Didn't we have another set of minutes to do?
No, we did both the minutes together. I can go back to it.
It's not, I had a second spelling correction, but it's not a big
Oh.
deal. It's not. So
Okay.
let's let it ride.
We'll come back to it at the end. Okay. So I sent out the document on the development constraints and opportunities, and I'll share my screen one more time. Okay. So we when we met on April 13th, we did this activity where we took we did a pretty much a brainstorming of what possible locations there are. And we started, you know, plotting them out, what they call as a jam board, where we look at, you know, greater impact, less impact, more feasibility, less feasibility. And we pretty much, it's like a real-time sticky board where we started, you know, just putting things out and trying to figure out, okay, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Tony was with us for pretty much maybe 8% of this discussion. We really lively discussion on this, and really tried to look at, you know, everything that we've talked about or know about. There were some new things that came up that people weren't aware about, but again, all just, theorizing at this point. Did anyone have any questions on the jam board or any of the options? Again, all of this is proposed. Nothing is finalized. This is just coming up with an inventory of what we think is available or potentially available, and, determining just when we went through a high level, what could or could we not do. I can make this bigger too, if this helps. So let's see. Things like, Greystone Road, town-owned land, identified for cemetery expansion, greater impact, kind of low on the feasibility, but still an opportunity. Coast Guard housing, town-owned, greater impact, kind of moderate feasibility. Let's see, BD area off Nahant Road. Can't remember what that BD stands for. It'll probably come to me as we get further along. Talked about the dump opportunity there. Less feasible, but impact, certainly on the impact side, but less feasible. Don't see. Okay. All right, so let me just scroll down. So there's different sections in here to talk about. Okay. Okay. So, all right. So, in here, that what they did was they included different maps where they identified excluded land, wetlands, different categorizations of the areas we discussed and what's, potentially could be buildable and what, could be buildable, but could have certain restrictions. So let's see if we can go through these. So each map had, pieces of information on data, certainly highlighting, as you would expect, on buildable lots, all the things around, partitions, petitions, open space, public right of ways, all of that. In here, they do highlight, the excluded land could be included as part of 3A districts. Something that, we can definitely look as a takeaway. Other things like, protected open space, town-owned property, parks, that stuff, those are things would likely be excluded. FEMA flood zones. So obviously, some of these are or could potentially in the flood zone. That could, draw attention and maybe be excluded. But then the other piece of it is, I think there's one in here on, if it's not flood zone, and I can't think of what is the other area. There's two things. There's flood zone and then there's
Buffer zone.
Buffer zone. Thank you. Buffer zone.
Or the velocity zone.
Yeah, where you could still, it shouldn't preclude us. It's just that maybe there's a different level of restrictions, in terms of being on pilings, no garage, those kinds of things. Before we move any further, I hopefully some of you took time to just kind of scan through it, but did you have any particular questions on some of their analysis that we should be honing in on?
I have a question in general. A document like this, which is quite detailed and full of information, it's almost impossible to discuss it fully
Right.
ourselves. So is there a way for a committee member to look at it closely, write a response, and share that written response with the rest of the committee in any way?
Hearing could be
So-
done at the next open meeting easily.
Yeah, so what we can do, Jim, is if you want to write a response and send it to me, I can send it to the committee, but the committee members can review it, and then we can discuss it at the next meeting. And certainly that it's an opportunity to kind of even go through and ask kind of the hard questions of MAPC, kind of review and challenge.
Yeah.
But we can't do any exchanges over email, but I'm happy to facilitate to the members, but send it to me first, and certainly we'll make sure MAPC gets it in advance so they can prepare their response.
Yeah, I would just caution that, we can't be responding to the response, and
That's
back-
right.
We can't go through Michelle to communicate. But if we just submit all our written comments and then,
Yeah, and
And
I
then-
can consolidate all of them together and then distribute them.
I think that sounds fair.
So, and then that would be distributed before our next meeting so that that could be considered by members if they wish to.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
So I know, I agree, some of this can be a little dense, and stuff, and it just gotta take some time to review it and digest it as well. Okay, so there was the portion on FEMA. I think for me, I would have preferred it organized a little differently. Because I know, and I understand kind of the purpose why it was organized by different maps. But I think a lot of it is what we probably already know. And I wanted to really get more into kind of risk or ranking locations and opportunities and see if, these make sense. So we come up with, say, 12 opportunities, but here are the top 5 we want to be leading going into the final report.
Michelle, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks,
It's
Lynn.
It's Lynn Spencer. I'm so sorry I missed the April 13th meeting. I have this question. I see that there's nothing shown on Little Nahant.
Yep.
And I know there's a reason, has to do with its density. Had you considered the idea of acquiring properties versus building on properties?
Yes, we
and-
definitely talked about that.
Couple of locations on Little Nahant come to mind. And I drive by the former pharmacy and just keep thinking, well, something ought to be done with that
Right.
that little building. So it seems to me that it's important that we think of a distribution Nahant wide rather than isolated or concentrating in certain areas.
Mhm.
That's all I'm saying. And I know
you
this
have-
will involve acquiring real estate.
Yeah, we did talk about that. The thing is, in order to acquire real estate, obviously, we've got to think about all of the things that come with that, right? With the taking
Mhm.
in terms of funding and if the town wants to support that, Swampscott just went through a couple of takings. They've been through 3, I think. Hawthorne by the Sea, General Glover. I think there's one on Pine Street that they're gonna do veterans. I'm not clear where the funding's coming from, and is that going back on the taxpayer?
Well, the funding would naturally fall upon the taxpayer unless there were some grant source that I'm not aware
Yeah,
of.
I'm not
However,
aware.
I'm not sure that it's necessary in order to accomplish what we're trying to do, at least in the 40B sense, to take the entire interest in a particular property. That's expensive. I mean, we're not even doing that at East Point, but yes, you could acquire an existing privately owned property. The town could own it, absolutely, and then deed restrict it and possibly sell it, whatever. And those things might apply to the Coast Guard housing. But it also occurs to me there may be a solution that would involve taking an interest, such as an easement or something akin to what was done at Northeastern that would have the effect of limiting the use of the property to the 40B purposes. And I haven't discussed this with anybody. I haven't heard any analysis of it, but I think we ought to consider whether there is a mechanism that would allow us to do that, because I think that could be, number one, less expensive, and number two, more palatable to the electorate.
I guess the only thing is like for the property owner, right? I mean, could be potentially their largest asset. And so they obviously, they want to benefit from it as well, right?
Well,
So
sure.
that's the thing I always get a little bit concerned about is who picks up the difference, right? Is it the taxpayer? Can we offset it through grants and loans, that kind of stuff?
Well,
And that's not clear.
Grants and loans are a separate subject, and we can turn to those. In the first instance, the taxpayer is going to pick up the tab for any interest that's taken from a private landowner, whether it's the whole of the ownership, what's called fee simple absolute, or taking of an interest such as an easement or other deed restriction. And
Mhm.
if the eminent domain law permits an action that would have the effect of a deed restriction through some mechanism other than an easement, certainly the owner is going to insist on being paid for it. The only point is the payment would be less than taking the whole of the property. The property owner would still be left with something that can be done with the property, although fewer things than before the town theoretically acted. So it's first going to be on the taxpayer, whatever we do, and there will be a cost. And then possibly some grants or other programs that could offset that. But it strikes me that if there is a mechanism to do that, it seems that we ought to know about how that could work, because it may be a solution that's just waiting for us, almost as simple as what Patrick proposed for Bass Point on the 3A.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay,
Thanks, Mike.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's helpful. Lynn,
That's it.
I'm not familiar about, other than I can only think of one property right now, and I don't know what the status is, but can you just highlight which locations you were thinking about? You can just give the streets.
On Little Nahant?
Yeah.
No, I don't have a specific thing. I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
saying we should be opportunistic and be watching that market, because there are smaller properties over there that, you're right. Anyone selling or any sort of sale or acquisition or taking is going to involve market value. But,
Yeah, and if you've been watching, like,
right.
I don't know if you've been watching the recent sales and what has been coming available, the market value in town is out of control.
I realize that. And so there's going to be a consequence to that. Sometimes it's going to be a hardship situation. There might be mortgage acquisitions, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't.
There's just a limited, there's a limited,
Yeah.
scope here.
And what goes up sometimes does come down.
Yes.
It hasn't lately, but there are potential opportunities in recessions and things like
Yeah.
that.
So
Properties and distressed properties.
And
Yeah,
we also,
I'm thinking of foreclosures.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sadly.
Yeah,
right,
so-
that's a good, foreclosures is a good point, and that's not to be overlooked, I agree. But we
yeah,
also
that's an
need to bear,
opportunity where we could step in.
How could the town, come up with include in our plan a facility for taking advantage of that? Because I think one of the problems with the town being opportunistic like that is that it just takes a long time for the town to do things. Any town, not just Nahant, it often takes a while to get, we have to go to town meeting for funding oftentimes, the lead time for, taking advantage of an opportunity like a foreclosure, which we don't have, lead time on potentially, could we have a fund established, or, could we have just that facility in place, ready to go, where the housing authority or the selectmen could just say, hey, this money is there, this borrowing authority is there to buy stressed properties.
No, that's a good idea. Patrick is, is that Daisy?
Sorry. Damn.
Daisy, approve or disapprove?
I know, I was gonna say, does Daisy approve or disapprove? I like the idea, Patrick, of if the town, so I guess it would create a kind of like, say, a line of credit.
Right.
Maybe it's a bylaw, maybe it's an article at next year's town meeting to allow the Board of Selectmen to acquire or create or obtain a line of credit of X dollars to be used for the purposes of property acquisition that addresses the affordable housing, but it would have to, in order to tap into it, there would have to be this whole set of criteria, right? So for example, if there was a foreclosed property in town and we felt it was advantageous for us, did it meet all of these requirements for us to go and acquire it at market rate and bypass town meeting, but with the intent of we're going to acquire it, rehab it, and then sell it as affordable housing?
I
Or
think there's two questions that need to be addressed on that. Number one is the funding mechanism, and one that occurs to me, and Mark may be able to help us on this, is establishing some sort of a revolving fund similar to what's done with the trash enterprise. I don't know if that can be done for real estate, but the other question is, typically any acquisition or disposition of property is done on a one-off basis by town meeting. So I wonder if Mark has any experience or insight as to whether it would be feasible to set up a revolving fund mechanism like this and have a town meeting article that by which the town authorized the selectmen to acquire foreclosed properties with a value of not greater than X through the use of this fund in order to satisfy 40B requirements.
So I'm just guessing off the top of my head here. A revolving fund requires a revenue source, a recurring revenue source. So, for example, trash, water,
Right.
and sewer, or enterprise funds has their own revenue source or stream. So to set up a revolving or enterprise fund for the purpose of acquiring real estate, I don't know what that revenue source would be. It probably couldn't be a surcharge on the taxes because we're limited under Proposition 2.5, sort of a levy limit on that. So I'm not quite sure where the revenue would be coming from on a regular basis.
Well, does it require that all the revenue is coming from an ongoing source? For example, I thought I understood that we can get some of the money that we need from CPA. Did I recall hearing that correctly?
That's correct.
So if we've established CPA as a regularized source for some of the funding of this, does that meet the criterion you just mentioned?
I'm not sure, Lynn, you may know better than I. Are you suggesting that there'd be an article authorizing the use on a recurring basis for CPA funds?
no, Mark, what we're thinking is if we're able to allow the town to create a line of credit, say it's a $5 million line of credit
The borrowing authority.
for borrowing purposes. We can't exceed the 5 million, but in order to use the 5 million, there's certain criteria for property acquisition. And then the payment of that line of credit would come from the housing portion of CPC. So if, we collect X, Lynn, and correct me if I'm wrong, if we collect $500,000 in revenue in CPC funds on a yearly basis, and 30% of that is allocated for housing,
No, could I just jump in? 10% of it is
it's only
allocated.
10%?
It's only 10%, but the balance, so it's 10% for community housing, 10 for historic preservation, 10 for open space and recreation. We've
Okay.
drawn very heavily on historic preservation funding on municipal properties, as well as open space. We've been very heavy on all of this. As you saw from what I sent you earlier, the applications under community housing have
Yeah.
not been numerous.
No,
And our committee is very clear that this housing production committee and the recommendations could be a significant set of recommendations for future allocation of CPA funding. So, you know, if $150,000 is set aside in those three categories, the balance is available for general, can be
oh, so we
allocated.
could still
10%
come
is a
back to you
minimum,
and
right?
ask for more.
Yeah. Exactly. And,
So-
if
Okay.
you all have missed the thrill of the insert that goes into the town warrant, because I was asked to do, there's going to be a separate handout at town meeting, but we document all of this very clearly.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I've been on some of your meetings. They're very interesting in terms of this process. So that's
Lynn,
good. So
10% is a minimum that goes to those
That's a
designated.
minimum.
that's a
okay.
minimum.
minimum.
So
So
that's
technically 70% could be allocated to housing as long as the other 30
Right.
is set aside for the other. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
So you could have $350,000 for, fund money in a year.
And-
And so I would just say, because we've been very heavily investing in open space and recreation and historic preservation projects, to me, there's it's an opening for
Right.
really creative community housing.
In other words,
The
we haven't burnt up our karma in that regard.
No, we haven't. And Mike, right now we have only probably, I don't know, $60,000 in the community housing reserve. And, otherwise we do have 3 bonds that, are obligations to us. But you'll see it in the town warrant,
Mhm.
there's going to be money. And fortunately now the state match is back up to 100%. So
Really? Wow.
it's
Oh, yeah.
quite strong, quite strong.
So that's where I think we're going with being creative, right? If
Right.
we develop an article, allow that there's a line of credit created that goes up to X amount that sets certain criteria for the purposes of housing. The funding source would be the housing portion of CPC. And it likely wouldn't be settled, or what would happen is the town would have to continually go back to CPC. We would get a minimum, the 10%, and then
Right.
to pay down the 5 million or whatever's being borrowed out of the line of credit, go back to CPC and say, for this year, we need X, right?
Yeah.
And then, we're not gonna be borrowing every year, but it gives us a revolving line of credit where we have a funding source, to Mark's point. In order for it to be supported, there needs to be that funding source.
Yeah, can I just interject? I was very carefully listening to everything and multitasking. I found a website, Massachusetts.org, housingtoolbox.org, that
Right.
addresses housing trust funds.
Mhm.
And it does talk about community preservation funding as a
And-
source.
And that's been a very important tool in many communities. I work, for instance, for the town of Easton, and their housing trust has been, a creative in helping acquire property and maintain it.
Perfect.
So
We
do-
just haven't had the initiative, quite honestly, in our community. And this committee is, to me, the initiative.
Well, that's
But
great.
this is
That's very exciting.
This is really interesting. I have it up on my screen, but we could create a housing trust fund as a recommendation
Yeah,
and put it before the town as well.
You
Yeah.
could absolutely do that. And in fact, in the early years when we first, became involved with community preservation, Jeff and I went to several workshops on this subject. And on the North Shore, for instance, in Beverly, there's a housing trust that I think is a good model for us. I think Boxford might have one as well. So there's places to look in terms of community preservation funding. And I think the other thing is we should let people know that they can either donate or donate some fee portion of their properties, which may be having tax benefits to this housing trust. I'll let those dogs out right now.
Mark, I know you're patiently quiet. Any thoughts?
No, I think it's something we should definitely explore. We're not talking about a revolving account or an enterprise fund. We're talking about establishing a trust fund.
Mm.
So
And
does anybody know whether the trust fund is a vehicle that would allow us to do what in other words, would be a funding source that could be used as flexibly as we need?
Yeah, it does appear like at first skim through this, it's grounded in Massachusetts state statute. And it does give buying authority. You know, you can give the trust fund and the trustees of that trust fund purchasing authority to further the purposes of the trust.
So that could be done with one vote on town meeting floor to provide the authority to the trust to do
Right.
these acquisitions, these opportunistic acquisitions, and would not require going back to town meeting year after year, property after property.
Yeah, and you can put restrictions that just, you know, you can limit powers so that you could buy, but, you know, selling property might require 2/3, you know, but there's different ways you can structure it apparently. So, you know, that would be something we could talk through the pros and cons. But,
And then you could add to it every year, by the way. So, you know, you can pull the money from the 10% plus additional amounts to go into it. And it forms basically a nonprofit, quite honestly, buying.
I mean, it's like a
buying mechanism.
municipal nonprofit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
sounds.
Mm.
And people
Yeah.
can donate property to it. So, you know, it's got some,
Well, this is a
Capacity.
huge breakthrough as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about, are we assuming that this acquisition would then be held by the town or would be acquired and then resold, which would replenish the funds?
Both. It could,
Are-
depending on what the use, how we structure the use of the property.
Yeah.
yeah, I
So-
think it's town property, you know, or it could be sold with restrictions, right?
And presumably it could be set up in such a way that you could get influence over a property for purposes of making its future use affordable without totally taking it away from the homeowner. I'm not sure about that as a mechanism, but I think it's something we need to consider for the purposes I mentioned earlier.
Mhm. No, I think this is great.
No, I think look into it. One of my questions would be, and I'll read this, Patrick, but is the borrowing limits of the trust. Probably would have to check with bond counsel on that. I mean, I'm not quite sure. You can't start borrowing more than what you can pay back.
Yeah.
So we'd have to look at what those limits are, and it could be based on what we're getting in terms of revenues every year. But it sounds very interesting.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Now,
Thank you.
that is very exciting. I'm a little bit disappointed in MAPC that they had not come up with this idea and put it in front of us.
Well, wait a minute, Mike. Now, we don't know. I mean, we haven't finalized or seen a first draft of the complete plan. It could be something that they just haven't presented to us, and, you know, we're, you know, just forward thinking, and, you know, I wouldn't discredit any of their work that they're doing. Their work's been very good. It's just that, you know, we haven't gotten there with them probably, and we might be ahead of them.
yeah, I'm sorry. And I think I just threw that out there. So forgive me. I was just starting with this foreclosure and acquisition thing, because I do think we have to look at those opportunities. And I agree with you, Michelle. I mean, this is a very methodical process that they're taking us through. So
Yeah.
the next thing will be talking about funding opportunities. I just jumped this a little bit. Sorry.
No,
Well,
that's
no,
fine.
you shouldn't apologize, Lynn.
Yeah,
This is a
don't
huge,
apologize.
this is a huge deal, and it's an excellent step forward. I'm just concerned, are there other similar jewels hiding under rocks that we haven't turned over and might miss? you know?
Well,
Hope there's
we're-
a monthly meeting, right? That's why we
Right.
meet.
We're gonna be meeting with them next week, Patrick. So these are all things, you know, we can definitely, will bring to them as well. But again, they probably have it in their toolbox. We just haven't we haven't, if anyone has a toolbox at home like mine, you have to take out like 5 hammers, 3 screwdrivers,
Yeah,
2 measuring tapes to find the tool that you need.
right. But if they can help us with how you would set this up and word, all the, how you word of
Yeah.
trust document, everything, that would be tremendously, that would give us a great leap forward. So it's,
Yes, it was. I definitely agree. Okay, so I'm gonna pivot back to just their document. We've been sitting on the open space one, but I think that's pretty self-explanatory around the different locations.
Actually, there's one other aspect about this that is valuable, that I think we ought to consider. We sort of been putting it to one side. I don't recall exactly how it works, but there is a way in which somebody like the town of Nahant can buy time in terms of 40B vulnerability, and that is by establishing a plan to do X, Y, and Z and making progress on the plan. And I think that was discussed in some of our earlier steps. But a program like this, if we can figure out the mechanism of it and get it stood up so that it can function opportunistically, may qualify as a plan that can buy us time. In other words, make us bulletproof for maybe 2 or 3 years before we're vulnerable to 40B.
yeah, I
Well,
thought
the
that,
housing production plan is going to do that for us, Michael.
I'm sorry,
I
what?
thought the bottom line on that was 0.5%. We had to make
Right.
0.5% progress against the 10% number every year, which I think equates to like 8 or 9 units per year.
Well, we're not going for numbers, we're going for land area anyway on 40B, right?
I don't think you get credit for land area, though. I think you just have to
Okay.
get there as soon as possible.
Right.
All right, so that was open space. Mean high water and sea level rise. So this was another map looking at those locations that could be impacted. And, again, we're pulling and drawing from data to help support some of this. Let's see. Okay, elevations. Certainly, we're definitely aware of higher elevations, especially when we think about like where the Nahant Housing Authority is in those locations versus some of the lower elevation areas that, again, could be in flood zone, but I don't want to look at that as a deterrent. Obviously, if it can help us accomplish our goals. It's just that whatever is built has to comply with all the building requirements around that. We know there's many houses that are in floodplain. Let's see. Okay,
Well,
wetlands.
do we know to what extent it's possible for new construction to take place in a floodplain area as opposed to continuing existing?
So when we think of, so the next section's on wetlands, so I think that's the good segue in here. So we can decide on those potential development sites. It will just really come down to what's permissible under the appropriate bylaws and what the building codes require in terms of building new construction. So, for example, there's been new construction built in wetlands. They're on pilings. And they're completely permissible, and they've met all of the requirements.
So I look at it also as, we're not going to get, if we put a 3A zone in a wetland area, we're not going to get credit. So that one right in the middle next to the golf course, that wouldn't be
Right.
3A,
Right.
but could be a 40B potentially.
But then, Patrick, to your point, the overlay though covers everything.
What overlay?
when you were talking about just doing a blanket 3A overlay over the entire town.
Oh, I didn't say that.
Oh,
I said an overlay in the context of talking about like Bass Point and the business district.
okay.
Um,
All
So
right.
that, yeah, no, an overlay just means it's overlaying an existing district.
Okay.
I would personally want to propose small overlays in specific areas.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Okay,
So,
perfect.
so can you clarify for everybody, Patrick, who are not as steeped in zoning mechanisms for us, exactly how an overlay works?
It's
They-
essentially a modification to the underlying zoning regulations that are overlaid, you know, if you think of the map there, an overlay on the map, so you've got a residential zone, but in part or all of that residential area, you can overlay specific regulations that apply just to that area, that overlay area. So, you know, so we could, the underlying zone is still residential. You don't lose or gain anything from, you know, it's always going to be residential, but if you overlay it, you gain additional development rights. And that's really what it's intended. It's to grant additional development rights to, and otherwise you would be restricted to single family residential.
Okay, it would, for example, in an area that's currently restricted to single family residential, the overlay would effectively be regulations that allow, let's say, two family under certain circumstances. Is that right?
Yeah, or let me be very specific. Bass Point, say you could overlay that entire lot that Bass Point Apartments are on, and say that you by right build apartment buildings up to certain size, density, you know, yada yada. All the, you would spell it out and describe either what's there or something slightly bigger. That's what an overlay would give you, and overlays do meet the 3A requirements.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Then plants, wildlife habitats. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We obviously don't want to impact those areas. And that is the end. So a little homework assignment. If you could do another read of this, send me your questions, your comments, your feedback by Tuesday. I will consolidate everything, make sure it's available for us to review at the next meeting and to pose these questions with MAPC. So we can take this document to the next discussion and break down, you know, the locations. Because one of the things they're working on is taking the locations that we had discussed, trying to, you know, get that additional detail on pros, cons, risk, reward, all of that. So we can come up with, you know, the best recommendations going into the plan. Okay. Let's see, moving on in our discussion. Okay, so next thing, before we leave this, I wanted to just talk about a few housing prompts that they had sent to me. So these were for additional information that they're looking to help develop and as inputs into the plan. So one of the ones, the first one was on the Community Preservation Act. So Lynn has already provided information to us, and it was really specifically around how have CPA funds been used in the past? How have we supported affordable housing initiatives? How are the funds dispersed? So Lynn, I haven't taken a look at that, so I will take a look at it. If I have questions, come back to you.
Fine.
For Council on the Aging, actually, I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, I apologize. So on Nahant Housing, I sent an email to David. Haven't heard back, but I will follow up with David. And I think it's Kelly Collins, who's the executive director at the Housing Authority. I'll reach out to her as well. Hopefully she can help provide some context around what they do in terms of obtaining funding sources, what work they've done for the affordable housing efforts in town. You know, the only thing that really comes to mind for me is they put the elevator in the senior housing, how is that done? That improves housing, for those residents. Some other things I know, like we did windows, siding and stuff, some of that came through CPC, but are there other needs that they've done and worked on? So the one thing I wanted to cover with the group tonight is other town resources. What other town resources and committees might have done something in terms of funding, policy, or programs that have supported housing needs in Nahant? And, there could have been something that was done, maybe when I was away in college, I just wasn't here for it. Or is the town, have we implemented any policies to kind of address the housing related needs, or, partnered with an organization? Nothing is coming to mind for me on this, but I wanted to pose it to the committee. And then certainly I'll, going to reach out to Tony for his insights as well.
Does NPT have any participation in any of this?
They can, we haven't. But they certainly could participate. They could have a role in anything. I mean, they're a nonprofit, so they can, they want to support affordable housing in Nahant. They could come up with a proposal and put it before the town.
Mhm. I would think that it would fall within their purview, in as much as we are trying to preserve Nahant, as well as make sure there's housing available.
I would, I'll just jump in, and I think Mike really could speak eloquently on this, but I think you would want to look at the mission and purpose of the Nahant Preservation Trust
Right.
and all of
Yeah,
that. And
it was done. Housing needs were not top of mind when we drafted the mission statement of
exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
Lots of other things were, but not
Right.
that.
Okay.
Michelle, I can't think of any sort of policy related documents, in the last 20 years, at least since I've been involved. I can't think of anything.
Have we
Yeah.
done anything like for employees of the town? Like, do we have a benefit for them as an employee of the town that says we can, if you live in town or move to town, we have, a benefit like a stipend or something?
No,
No, okay.
These are all things the Housing Trust could actually sort of sweep in,
Yeah,
I have to say.
I mean,
The
I don't know.
Housing Authority, I've tried more than once and my committee to reach out to the Housing Authority for doing more than just fixing their buildings. Thinking about housing vouchers, for instance, and all kinds of other things. But I think, they now have a part-time director. She's doing her best to sort of deal with the issues related to tenancy and building care. But I think she would be a good person to sort of have a conversation with. Mickey Long was instrumental,
I
quite
know.
honestly, in that elevator. He really did the job on that.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well.
Really fantastic, because yeah.
So you think that there is essentially outside support that could flow to Nahant citizens by way of the Housing Authority through vouchers if they jumped on it?
No, I'm not, no, community preservation could fund housing vouchers. We would simply need an application coming to us to say, this is how we want to do it and how we want to manage it.
Right.
Yeah, but the voucher it could be so many things. It could be from apartments to closing costs to home improvements. It's whatever. I mean, it's basically an opportunity, a different grant or funding source for someone, that it fits within those parameters for affordable housing.
Yep,
Hmm.
exactly.
Okay.
But
right.
I think the Housing Authority should be consulted. They should be a partner. They know the housing needs from their perspective of management, because they manage the Spindrift and the Greystone Road property and the former Coast Guard property on Flash Road. So they've got you know, a portfolio, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think the thing, people look at them as, their role is to manage public housing, but their role, to your point, and my point is, it could be more than just managing public housing.
Right.
They could be implementing other programs because of the housing need for that other group in the community that needs support.
Michelle, I'm so sorry, in committee, I have to take a call, a personal
Sure.
call, so, and it's not the barking dogs. But I think we're almost at the end. I think you'll probably
Yep.
continue, but I'll just.
Yeah, no, go ahead. We'll continue. The other question that came up from MAPC was addressing the gap in housing in Nahant. So what are the gaps in Nahant's housing capacity to address housing needs, and where should Nahant focus on building capacity in the future? So, I mean, we talk about, I think we've talked many times about Nahant's capacity to address housing. But I think now it's trying to crystallize what's the focus, right? Is the focus opportunities to identify locations and build? Is the focus generating funding sources for people to tap into? I guess it's trying to, either extend what we already know or crystallize where we should be really focusing on what that future is. So, I mean, we talked about remediating 40B, we talked about the GLAM analysis, talked about 3A. I mean, I would like to see a project. I would like us to see to create senior housing, create affordable housing for people, but it's coming up with location that's digestible to the voter and the costs. And I feel like sometimes we don't have enough information to even put focus on it, because each one of these locations needs a cost benefit analysis, frankly.
I agree with you, Michelle. One thing that I was looking at those maps earlier. One thing that I think we should consider as a possibility is the housing authority's property on Spring Road and Emerald Road. Okay, maybe taking them down and building something different. Maybe that could accommodate more, be more appealing, sort of townhouse type style units, those types of things. But those are two big pieces of property that I think we could do a better job at.
So
That's a good idea.
can
That's
I,
different.
Mark, that would not advance our goal of the GLAM analysis, right? It would just be renovating, possibly increasing units. But in terms of our goal for compliance, I think our emphasis now is on land stuff. I agree with you, but that wouldn't help us with 40B, I don't think.
Well, I think Michelle's meaning to open a new front, an additional objective in addition to 40B and 3A. Is that right, Michelle?
Potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I've always viewed the housing production plan more than just trying to meeting the thresholds of 40B or 3A. I mean, I think our needs are greater than that. It's great if we can meet those thresholds in doing this, but I think there are other issues, housing that should be addressed.
I'm not disagreeing with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that in terms of priorities, at least in my mind, the priority is compliance with 40B. That's the protective thing. Can we do additional stuff? Yes, but the priority should be the 40B, I think.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think there are parcels that we've identified that can get us to the GLAM threshold
Good. Yeah.
already.
Right. So since we're a committee and we exist, we may have some additional bandwidth that can be extended to address the additional challenge that Michelle has put on our plate.
Thanks, Mich-
I'm glad you think I'm putting it on my plate. I'm happy to share lots of bits with everybody. But it's interesting though, we talked about all different sites and locations, and now Mark just added a new one that I didn't think about, taking existing town land and modernizing it in a way that expands, capacity in those locations, building up, building out, and that helps with the affordable need.
I think Mark's idea is great. It's very much worth considering. The one thing I'm curious about in setting aside 40B and 3A and simply focusing on adding housing stock with the objective of accommodating seniors and people's offspring who couldn't otherwise afford housing. I think that's a great objective. My question is, to what extent do we have the power to do that, even with Nahant Housing Authority projects, to expand our housing stock in such a way that it is either limited to or favors occupation by those two categories, Nahant seniors or Nahant offspring?
So I would just like to suggest to think along the lines of seeking federal funds or state funds, which might be brought in to accomplish the goal that Mark just articulated, and focusing on renewable energy and all those environmental things as possible sources of funding. In other words, we want to renovate these buildings, add additional units, and we need the assistance of the state or the federal government to make that environmentally sustainable as a funding source.
Heated by modern heat pumps, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Heat pumps and solar panels and
Highly insulated.
highly insulated. Exactly. Yeah.
I think those are all really important. So if we had to think about priorities, is there any one particular priority that stands out?
Well, can I just say holistically, I think it's I think we've laid it out pretty well, the meeting the 40B requirements, first with GLAM and then, plus additional units where possible. But I think the minimum viable product type of thing, the first priority, the need is to somehow meet the 40B requirement. And the same with the 3A, that's the minimum requirement, to just find some zone that overlay that we can just meet that 3A requirement. And then if we want to stretch that into our commercial business district and promote some forms of housing with that's I think a good stretch goal there. And then, all the other things, I think everything else are nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
Trust fund, proposing a trust fund, aiding people, promoting housing diversity, all those things are very nice to have, and we should certainly include them.
And Michelle, are you asking us to say which of the various pieces of property that have been identified on that map emerge as the top priorities for, either
Yeah,
achieving the
it's-
GLAM or?
Yeah, I hate asking that. I don't.
Oh,
know
I'm
if
going
it's
to
a-
jump in. I'll do it. It's really simple to me. It's the military, it's the former military housing parcel over here. I can see it from where I'm sitting.
Yep.
And it's the country club property. If I think
But-
about,
But for the country club property, was it the discussion we had on the 3 apartments?
no, I'm talking about the Nahant Country Club property, the land company.
Is that the land in front of it?
Eminent domain on that big frontage on Nahant Road.
Exactly, Mike. And then actually dealing with units in the building, if not building beside it. I mean, the country club, I think, is just a very vulnerable situation. And the land company, with all due respect, has managed it for a very long time with the leasing to the country club. And then they in turn lease to, the manager of the premises. But it's a struggling situation. And,
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
quite honestly, I think its vulnerability is real.
Right. It's low hanging fruit in the eyes of developers.
Absolutely,
Right.
Mike.
But
And
do we want to make it lower? I mean, I think that's is there?
No.
No.
no, I creative solution.
Deed restrict part of it or all of
Absolutely.
it so that it qualifies for glam.
Exactly. I mean, acquire it by eminent domain or whatever it has to be. Restrict the whole front of it. No more tennis courts, by the way. I think we've had enough over there. and so sorry. On this note, I have to actually take this call. Mike,
No.
you carry it on. You carry it on.
That's a grenade over the fence.
That was a perfect segue.
Right.
That's, that's great. I think for me, I have this desire for the senior housing. But locations are expanding, currently where Greystone Road is and High Street. If we can do it, we already own the land. So, it's just a bolt on and, trying to find the sources of funding to help do that. And that might be an easier first step. We still gets us the glam, but it also gets us more a housing need that we've heard consistently through the first community engagement, as well as, other meetings and forums where people have said more senior housing, more senior housing, more senior housing.
Well,
So-
I don't know what the square footages are of these areas. Seems to me that the Greystone area that you're talking about, Michelle, is the lowest hanging fruit because it's simplest to include in our, if you will, our glam collection. But that may or may not be enough. And to the extent that it isn't, then I suggest that we need to consider some deal with the country club. They may be quite open to it, but the town has the ability to do as it did with Northeastern and take civic action, legal civic action that would add a parcel of that land to our glam assemblage to meet the threshold.
I mean, we could do like we did previously through CPC and float a bond for the purposes of the acquisition.
Well, that's great. That's the money. I'm talking about the legal authority and the availability of square footage. So we certainly need the money, but we
Yep.
also need the strategy and the legal authority.
So I think that the two lowest hanging pieces of fruit would be the Goddard Drive area of the military housing and
Mhm.
Great Road. Those two would meet the glam.
And
Which-
what was the second?
Say that again, Mark.
Goddard Drive and Greystone Road would meet
Oh.
the glam.
Now, depending on the development, so my understanding is if they're rental units, the entire area, so you could set aside, 20%, I think 20% or 25% as affordable rental units, provided everything is a rental unit in a development. But that whole area would then be eligible for glam analysis.
Are you including right across the street from me, that area?
I would probably not. I would probably look at the lower part
The lower, yeah.
at Greystone Road on the other side of the tower.
Right. How does the cemetery expansion fit into that? I thought right across from me was going to be the cemetery.
it could very well be. You know, burials have changed quite a bit in the last 20 years. I know when I first started, about 75 to 80% of all burials were traditional burials. That's pretty much flipped at this point. So I don't think that the need for that sort of expansion is necessary as it was, you know, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that area directly across from you could very well be a cemetery for cremation spots, and probably bring us into the next century.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Yeah, I think the lower half of, I mean, I think the topography of the, you know, you're on the side of a hill, the
Right.
with the antenna on the top of the hill, and then the housing authority land is really at the base and wraps around. So I think, you know, additional units along Greystone and perhaps, or just even in addition to the elderly housing.
Yeah.
You know, that to me makes sense. And then that's all part of your GLAM analysis and
Right.
adds units to your 40B.
Yeah, and you know, the entrances could be, the entrance to that could be through where the driveway is to Spindrift right now.
Yeah.
And so you could drive in, you know, enter the complex there. You know, it could include, you know, those wooden structures that we just recited, those duplex sort of housing, that could be incorporated. I mean, the whole development in that area on the
Greystone.
Greystone area, I think could have huge potential. We own it. And we all got to drive. And those two would meet the GLAM threshold.
Mhm.
But Mark, I had a
And
clarifying question on the, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
I
And
was
the
just saying
other
on
two,
the bullet.
the other two areas would be the country club and perhaps the St. Thomas Church area.
Yeah.
So I just object to the church being included unless the church has said they're interested in closing down the church. I mean, I think that's a community institution, and I don't think we should target it unless it wants to be targeted.
I've had conversations with the Archdiocese on this.
Who?
And we may not be, you know, so there's basically, we could divide that property pretty easily, right where the rectory is, leave the church, but the whole rectory area, the Archdiocese may be interested in talking to the town about that.
Okay, well, I thought that had to be sold and reverted to the family if it wasn't used for a rectory. I had just heard that. I hadn't seen anything in writing on that, but
Yeah, that's not my understanding, but
okay.
I would just like to add a prejudice, if I might. I always grew up in communities that had a green, you know, the central green. In New Haven, you have a big green. In West Haven, you have a green. In Milford, these are the towns that I grew up. So I always loved the fact that we drive into town, and in the middle of our town, we have a big green space. I like it aesthetically.
Everybody does, but it's privately owned and could be sold tomorrow.
So I mean, I think we're kind of. I mean, to me, I would support the eminent domain of the country club property if it was heavily in favor of a open space component. So I think that's where it gets me, you know, why are we talking about it in this committee versus, you know, I think there certainly could be a housing component to that, but you know, that's where I would focus, you know, on trying to preserve as much of that green as possible. And then, you know, seeing where there could be some infill.
So it may be that our GLAM threshold is satisfied by the two properties Mark just mentioned. But obviously everybody's got their eyes on what happens to the country club, and the country club is owned by a sort of a creaky, archaic organization. And you know, things could happen quickly with that. So to the extent that it has civic value, even if it's not by this committee, we ought to consider what could be done to prevent that from being sold to development, even if it's not a hostile 40B.
Yeah,
Yeah.
is that in the open space plan identified as a opportunity for acquisition?
Well, the country club, the land company does get tax credits now for keeping it as open space. So they are with that now. I have had conversations with members of the land company about this. You know, I think there's some potential there. I think it could be a friendly eminent domain taking. I'm not quite sure if what role the shareholders have in that vote, but I believe from what I was told that it would just be a majority of the board of directors vote on this, but I'm not sure of the legal aspects of that. I think if we went at the country club, I would suggest we do it in a friendly way, and sort of have a friendly taking, and it could serve multiple purposes. Some housing, some a central common for the town. Be a great place to put a gazebo and have our farmers markets there and those types of things.
Yep.
But you know, we should have that conversation with the board of the land company.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that they'd be receptive.
I just remember, Mark, that when Jack Ryder wanted to develop that, it was prevented by a majority of the shareholders having to vote on doing anything. It wasn't just the board.
Yeah, I think so. Again, I had one meeting a while ago on this with a few attorneys who were involved in the land company. And it was my understanding that it may only require a vote of the board of directors.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think you need an eminent domain taking
Right.
to undo that, because I'm pretty sure if it does require shareholders, I mean, NPT is a big shareholder. That's a convenience. I think it's 20% or something like that. But yeah, otherwise, I think people have shares, physical shares. I know people have them on plaques on the wall.
Yeah. I think you're right, Patrick. What they were saying, what I was being told was, if it was a taking by the town, then the taking would only have to could be approved, well, authorized with a board of directors vote.
It would be accepted, the compensation type of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Somebody has to accept the money.
Exactly. And there may not be money involved.
Right.
Mean they would give it to us?
Perhaps.
Well, that's a great notion. Let's let that one sit for a little bit, and we'll just have to compare it with everything else that comes into the fold. So
Yeah.
anyone else have anything else? Any other recommendations or things that are top of mind that they see as the focus for, you know, the opportunities that we're trying to, you know, identify, and then, you know, eventually that may get into the plan?
I
It's
think
been a good discussion.
it's been a good discussion tonight. Really good.
All right, so let's move on. I'm gonna go into the next item. So we've town meeting on May 20th. What we wanted to do is just have a small informational table, like from say 12 to 1:15, for, you know, just to greet residents as they're coming into town for the town meeting, have some information available to them about what we've been doing, answer any questions, maybe capture email addresses so they can be on a list. So when there are some substantive updates, we have a way of communicating through them. And then two other things that would be coming up, and it segues into two other activities. One is a virtual open house where we just do it on Zoom. And it's an opportunity for residents to ask questions of the committee and MAPC, share some information in our thinking around what we're considering for proposed sites, get their feedback and opinion on it, and then use that to pivot into an in-person community engagement as well, where we would talk again, you know, pros and cons of locations. We say we come up with a list of 12 or 15. Now we bring that list down to say, you know, 5 to 7, and really just focus on if, you know, we started big, now we're getting small and we want to get it into the plan, you know, have folks give us more discrete pieces of information to help us with that, you know, decision making and then finalizing the plan. So that's kind of objectively what we're thinking. MAPC is, you know, kind of putting the straw man approach together in terms of if we move forward with the virtual open house, have all the materials ready for us, help us facilitate that. We'll do a press release, promote it like we've done. We know in our town, folks attend virtual meetings. The success of the Board of Selectmen's meeting is a great example of that. You can't, I attend that meeting, but where have we seen, you know, 15 or more people in person at a Board of Selectmen's meeting? The Zoom meetings are just incredibly valuable. So hopefully we can, you know, and people speak. So that's good. So I wanted to see if the committee felt like the virtual open house would be a good means for the residents to talk just in a very more comfortable and relaxed forum about affordable housing in Nahant.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. We were tentatively looking at the week of May 22nd, Mark, and everyone else. Maybe, you know, and depending on, I'll have to look at the schedule for the Board of Selectmen's meetings as well, but it's before Memorial Day and after town meeting, so maybe, you know, Wednesday or Thursday night from like, you know, 7 to 9.
Could exclude May 25th. That's my 80th birthday.
Is it really? Oh, man.
Yeah, and my 50th anniversary living in town is coming up as well.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we meet next week with MAPC, we'll talk again about this, probably nail down the date, but I guess we could lean towards May 23rd and May 24th if people were comfortable with that. That gives us about almost 2 weeks. If we come out of the meeting on the 11th, we're probably going to drop a press release and get it promoted pretty quickly.
That's good.
Okay. And then in terms of the community engagement, when we met on the 13th, we talked about June, let's get my calendar up here, June 14th. So there's a soft hold on that date right now. And we would do that in-person town hall. I think same thing, like 7 to 9. Definitely similar format probably that we had in terms of setting up with a check-in, and I think we'll have to talk just with MAPC in terms of, you know, what's the deliverables are going to look like, how are we going to engage the audience, that kind of stuff. And certainly make sure, you know, we have podiums and all that, all those things necessary to really help, you know, facilitate that discussion.
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so any new business before the committee, anything anyone wanted to talk about tonight that we haven't covered in our previous meetings, or something new came up top of mind that, you know, you saw someone, a resident or someone brought to your attention and you thought you want to bring it to this meeting? Okay. All right, then there isn't anything. We will have our next meeting on May 11th. Does the 6:30 time slot work for folks?
Yes. Mhm.
Yes, okay. All right, 6:30. I will send out the agenda, follow up with MAPC on everything that we talked about tonight. Continue our dialogue on options in town as we continually progress with the plan. And certainly review, the constraints document that we talked about tonight.
Sounds great.
Any parting words from anybody?
Yeah, I just want to congratulate Patty on your reelection to the school committee.
Oh,
Here.
yes. Congratulations, Patty.
Thank you.
Or condolences. It could be condolences too.
It's a 3-year term. Talk to me in a year. It's a lot going on at the school.
That's good. That's very good.
Yeah,
Michelle, that's what I would like to always add. Great job.
Oh,
I
thank
I
you.
want to reach out to you, Patty, on another matter. I'm working with a small group on some food waste composting issues, and I was hoping I can get the school involved in this too. So maybe we can talk about that at another time.
Absolutely, Mark.
Mark, I signed up for Black.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I signed up for them. I can tell you in the month that I've been doing it, the waste has gone
Amazing.
down. I can't believe how much has gone
Amazing.
down by diverting it.
Yeah.
I'm just amazed.
Yeah.
Amazed.
We're in that
You
So-
camp
don't, feel,
too.
you don't feel as bad, tossing it out because it's going to go back to the earth. So,
No, like I said, Chris couldn't believe it either. Like, just the small bag of trash that's going out the door compared to what it used to be with the food waste. Now that we're diverting it, it is a big difference, and it hopefully makes a positive impact.
mhm.
Yeah, I would definitely advocate if the town can, take it to the next level
We're trying.
and get more people to subscribe. Be really good. We could be, and I don't know, is it available in other communities? Like, our communities, it's one thing to go through Black Earth Compost, but is there any community that's part of their trash program right now?
Well, City of Boston has it, but there's actually a waiting list for it, which we're on in Charlestown. But yeah, there's a few communities that really subsidize it. I'm not quite sure we're there. I think I had a meeting today on it. I think we can probably incentivize it somehow and promote it. So maybe get some of the restaurants involved, get the school involved, those types of things. But it maybe even provide the containers of the town, provide the containers.
Mhm.
The question is, Black Earth seems to be the major vendor in town. There are other vendors, so I'm not quite sure if the town is able to sort of
Single source, right?
Yeah,
but I believe we are, because we single source our
Trash.
trash.
Yeah.
That doesn't require an open bid. So I would imagine composting would be the same. So we're inviting Black Earth into our next meeting to talk to them about ways of getting the community more involved.
that'll be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Hey, Mark,
Okay.
just a quick thought. This is sort of 30,000 foot level, so I don't expect you to have a comprehensive answer. But in view of Michelle's, if you will, new topic of expanding housing generally, has selectmen had any consensus or had any studies that would suggest that it is beneficial for the town to have the population increase? In other words, from the tax base and so forth, do we feel that we're better off if we build the population back up to a little bit more like what it used to be?
Well, Patty could probably talk about that more than me. Certainly the impacts on the school.
Yep.
Benefits there. We currently have a school that the town put the big extension on in 2004. And the school is really underutilized. I know that preschool and first grade there are more kids coming up, but certainly you'd like to see the younger population increase in town. And there's certainly benefits to that socially.
Absolutely.
Mm.
All right, thanks. Don't want to extend the meeting.
We have to get better. We have to get more competitive in our little league. So we need more kids.
Yes, we need to bring the Little League back to Nahant.
Yes, we do.
Okay, we really, really need to do that. Someone who grew up with playing softball and loves baseball, I was very disappointed to hear about that.
Mm.
Okay, so with that, I don't think we have anything else further discussion. Could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Jim. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Patrick, second. Okay, and a roll call vote. Patty,
Hi.
Jim,
Aye.
Patrick,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
Michael.
Aye.
The chair is aye. It is 8:17 PM, so we're gonna adjourn. Lynn is absent, so we will send our regards back. Thank you, everyone, for a great meeting. Really appreciate it.
Thank
And we
you.
will talk to everybody later. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Great. Take care.